This is the Teacher Talking Time podcast.
We attended a talk of yours over 4 years ago when you were here in Ottawa, and I just brought the abstract up because I found it, and it was about training novice teachers, pre-service, I believe, in Honduras.
Yeah.
And can you, this is putting you on the spot, and hopefully if you don't remember, that's okay, but can you walk us through that? I think we're really interested in this novice teacher idea in TBL. Both, we were talking, the three of us, before you jumped on, about how maybe grassroots isn't the right word, but just in a training perspective where traditionally TBL is not included. And that can be, one of the causes of this. But I guess we could classify novice teachers as just, if you haven't tried a TBL approach before, you might fall into that category as well. What was your experience, and what did the study kind of go through, and others that you've conducted since then, at a pre-service level of, what Leo said, kind of people have a myth that it can't be done, or it's not a good time to try that or to apply that. How would you kind of counter that line of thought?
Yes. Well, yes, I do remember that study because it was my dissertation research. So I
Okay.
will never forget it. Yes. Well, first of all, I definitely would argue that it is a myth. In fact, I think in some ways it's easier, and I wouldn't say there's necessarily empirical evidence on this point, maybe not for TBLT, but perhaps in general education, that it is easier to integrate kind of new pedagogical innovations for people who are novice teachers because they haven't already kind of not fossilized, but they might be a little bit more receptive to kind of
less of a guard, maybe.
To new ways of teaching because they haven't already come up with the ways that they're very sure work for them.
You're very diplomatic.
You're being very, I was going to say that.
Don't say stubborn. Don't say stubborn. We've all been there.
We've all been there. And I am totally the
stubborn
same.
too.
Yeah. If you came to me and said, the class you're teaching in spring, I want you to revolutionize the way you're teaching it and spend your whole winter break working on that, I'd be like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Like it's not easy. So I don't want to kind of diminish the fact that teachers who have a lot of teachers are always on a growth journey where they're excited to learn about new things. And I mean, you go to ACTFL, you go to these teacher-centered TESOL conferences, it's full of all of these excited teachers that are all sharing new ideas, new approaches. So teachers are usually always excited about that. But novice teachers I definitely don't think it's the wrong time. In a way, I think it could be the perfect time because then you get them excited about research-based strategies from the very beginning, rather than saying, hey, maybe you should try it in a new way because there's all this new research. And then you come up, it's kind of face threatening, like, oh, have I been teaching wrong? Are you saying that I'm like not a good teacher? So and of course we're not saying that. So you don't have that issue as much with novices. But anyway, so these teachers, this is the same organization where I started teaching in Honduras. And they are I think like a lot of NGOs that operate, and this one's really cool in that it is owned and operated by Hondurans who, they want to be able to offer bilingual education in their kind of rural area schools. So they partner with an NGO so that they can support and train English speakers to be able to offer bilingual education without charging like high tuition fees, which is usually the only way to access bilingual education especially in Central America, in that region. So that's the organization. And like a lot of these organizations, they have a very short window to train people who are coming to work at those schools and get them up to speed on the way that teaching is done there. So that's it's really just a 4-week kind of summer camp where they do 2 weeks of kind of intensive training, and then they do a practicum where they get to try out things in the classroom. So I was supporting that and helping train the teachers, and we integrated TBLT into it. And so I thought that would be a great opportunity to investigate for these more novice teachers who are first years at the schools, how they take in that information and then how they apply it when they are asked to in a teaching practicum. So I was interested in how it might affect their beliefs, maybe their pre-existing beliefs about how language is learned generally, and also about approaches to language teaching, which mostly come from how people experience learning languages themselves. So they might say, well, I learned this way and it really worked for me. So like, I think that's great, which could be true. So I kind of measured whether there were change in beliefs from before and after they participated in this task-based training. And then I also looked at the kinds of tasks they developed for their classrooms that they tried out in the practicum. And we did stimulated recall interviews, which is just where I video recorded them and we watched the video back right afterwards. And I just asked them open-ended questions like, what were you thinking about? So I really was able to get at how they were kind of trying out information that they had just learned in the classroom. And what we were just talking about, which is that the reactive side of it is very difficult. That was one of the outcomes that I saw, which was that the reactive side of teaching, the corrective feedback, the responding to kind of individual issues as they arose and bringing in that focus and form on the right times, that was where they were struggling the most. So kind of validates the conversation that we were just having. And that's kind of an area that I am still exploring today.
You
Nice.
said it's this whole reactive teaching is really interesting because I came across a guy. I'm trying to remember his name right now. He wrote a paper on reactive teaching. Yes, I found it. 2021. Alasmari and Alta Kafi. They wrote about teachers' practices of proactive and reactive strategies in the classroom. And I think that I wanted to like maybe you can elaborate a little more on this whole reactive teaching thing. What exactly, you said corrective feedback was one of them, but were there any other specific areas of this whole reactive teaching thing that you found were difficult for teachers, especially novice teachers? Because when you are used to teaching preemptively, you're basically proactively. You just say, okay, I'm going to teach the present perfect. I'm going to teach the simple past. Hopefully we can, contrast the two of them. And then that's fine. But when you do that through a task and then you have to react, that's where the difficulty seems to stem from. So what could you say about reactive teaching? Is that something, and I know you haven't researched this, but maybe you know more about this than I do, but what could teachers do to develop this reactive teaching muscle or this reactive teaching, perhaps, mindset?
Yeah, well, this is what we kind of call a lot in TBLT of the difference between the task as work plan and the task as process, right? Which is you have this plan for your task that you maybe write down and you think it's going to go a certain way. And then you have the actual thing that happens when you try it out in the classroom, which we've all been there. I'm always there. It happens all the time, even in
good learning.
teaching
It's
grad
good learning,
schools.
I guess.
Yeah,
Happens during our podcast when the audio stops working. We have to figure it out.
Right, exactly. So I think that, if I think back on I tell my students this too, that when I first started teaching, I would write these like robust lesson plans, like almost down to the word of what I was going to say, because I was so nervous that I was, I don't know, going to say the wrong thing and ruin their like psychological development or something like that. So I would, like really over prepare, and that really makes it hard to be reactive, right? Because if you've over prepared, you're like, well, I worked really hard on this lesson. I've got to implement it as I intended to. And you start to become almost blind to moments of, actually, this seems like the perfect moment to deviate from the plan and focus in on what's happening right now. So part of that is experience. I think most teachers know that they've probably grown in that way over the years, being in a classroom and knowing when it's okay to go off script in a way. Not that you should be scripting your lessons. That was not ever a good idea. It was totally just nerves for me. But also, kind of allowing yourself the opportunity, even building it in, if you are writing lesson plans in a detailed way, of areas where you think that there could be opportunities to pause and reflect or look at, do some just like observing and noting down things that you're seeing and noticing and kind of building that in. I think that like builds in reactivity into your design process, rather than just saying, oh, well, if it happens, something cool happens, stop and engage with that. So it makes it more of a practice, and that can help people, I think, develop that skill set, which also comes, I think, from experience.
I wonder if it's also perspective as well, right? Like seeing the students as kind of co-investigators, kind of like equal participants in the process itself, right? Like if you're kind of giving them the platform and really entrusting them with the direction of the lesson and listening from the side, that perception alone might bring more kind of teachable moments to the surface, I feel.
Oh, I completely agree. I think anytime you give agency back to your students is a time where you can really see some interesting things happen. And I think there's a lot of research in general education sciences for sure that student agency can lead to greater motivation. And of course, we know motivation and language acquisition is incredibly important. So finding a way to activate that, I think giving students agency over their learning is definitely one great way to do that.